Writing Out Loud, a program designed to explore in-depth interviews with writers to hear that words have voices. Our hostess for today's program is Teresa Miller, Executive Director for the Oklahoma Center for Poets and Writers at OSU Tulsa.
Hello everyone, I'm Teresa Miller and welcome to Writing Out Loud. My very special guest today is best-selling author Amy Tan. Thank you for being here, Amy.
Good to be here.
In the first part of our interview, we talked about the Joy Luck Club, and we were just beginning to talk about your work on the film, The Joy Luck Club. You were the co-producer, co-screenwriter. What's it like for you as a writer to come at your story from so many different perspectives?
Well, I had no idea how to do it, for one thing. And it wasn't until I met this screenwriter and a director named Wayne Wang. The screenwriter, Ron Bass, had an idea of how this would be done by creating this overall story of a party and a woman saying you didn't know the reason for the party, and you realize after a while she's going to China for the first time to meet these sisters she never knew she had. But in their talking about the story, I saw it from a different point of view. And I almost felt as though they knew the story more intimately than I did, that I had simply written it, but they had looked at it and tried to think how another person would experience it. It was a wonderful time, a wonderful process of collaboration, and I never thought I would have liked collaboration. But I found first two very good people who were extremely talented and well-respected in their field, but also very ethical. I had been worried about getting involved with Hollywood because I had heard such terrible stories and how they will basically eviscerate the soul of a writer. And yet these people were so respectful that they wanted me to be part of the film. I was ready to just turn it over to them and say, you make the best film you can. They said, no, we want you to be a screenwriter and a producer. And I said, I have no idea what a producer does. And they said, that's okay. We still want you as a co-producer. And I said, well, I want written in my contract that I don't have to go to meetings. And they did. They wrote that in there. It meant that I had equal say on everything, from casting and editing and everything. They respected my judgment so much that they wanted to give me that. And so I felt very honored. I thought that I was in the best graduate school in filmmaking you could possibly be in, because there I was given all the notes on what to do, and I could start and write 10 pages of the screenplay and then fax them over. We used faxes back then. Fax them over to the other real screenwriter, and he'd give me his comments, I rewrite, and we'd move ahead. And by the end of that process, the school year, we had a movie.
You actually made a cameo appearance, didn't you?
I did. Wayne Wang, the director, insisted that both Ron and I be on and the party scene, both for good luck, and just it was expedient because we had to write changes in as things were being written. We had to be on the set anyway. So, and he didn't have to pay us as extras. And Ron was on the telephone as we walk in the film on his cell phone, and who he was calling was Wayne's home number and saying, Wayne, we're on the set now, we're calling your home, and, we're getting tired of these numerous takes, we hope that you like this one. It was fun, but I have no aspirations after that to become an actor. There's a lot of wait before you actually do things. It's very difficult work. I have tremendous respect now for what actors do.
Do you think your experience with the film helped you be a better novelist?
It helped me look at scenes differently, and realizing also that scenes in movies, what the differences are between literary stories and stories and imagery on the screen. In a movie, you can't stop. You can't pause and reflect over a beautiful passage. And you have to be absolutely clear. And at the end of each scene, you have to earn the emotions on that absolutely clearly. It has to be immediate. And you have less time, in a way, to have these little subtle transformations of moments that happen. And learning what those were, I realized that sometimes it's good to have how you deal with what people expect emotionally, and then to do a very subtle shift in the emotion to get a more a greater impact. But I do think that still stories, literary stories are very different from movies. And so it's not a direct translation at all. I really much prefer writing fiction than writing screenplays. Screenplays are fun, they're exciting, they're frustrating in a larger sense because you are bound by constraints you don't have to think about with fiction. If I want to put down that 100 angels dance on the head of the pin, I don't have to think about how somebody's going to do that with special effects and paying a bunch of stunt actors, you know. Everything is constrained in a different way with a movie. And you're subject to so many people's different opinions at different levels. We had total creative control, which is something they do not give to most directors, let alone most screenwriters. And that meant that we really could take people's advice but say, no, we're still going to do it that way. We did take certain people's advice and change things, but you cannot write something with absolute integrity if you have to listen to a committee of opinions, some of which contradict one another. You end up with mush, and we had a clarity of vision, and we didn't want that to be lost. And I think that's why the movie succeeded, that the three of us began with this same vision, and we continued with it and sharpened everything and knew what to take as good advice, but not let ourselves be co-opted by, oh, if you do this with change the role to, you know, men or women or whatever, you'll get a bigger, you know, audience rating. You can't be guided by things like that.
We know that a lot of your mother's personal history informs the Joy Luck Club and your relationship with her. Did you get to see the movie with your mother?
I did.
That had to be an interesting experience.
It was really interesting. We were in Los Angeles at a screening. Annette Bening introduced the film, and all these people were there, Richard Gere, and so it was a big Hollywood moment.
Sure, yeah.
And, you know, the red carpet, and I'm there, and my mother is walking with me, and the photos are going off. We sit in the audience, a huge audience filled with people for this opening, and see the movie. Everybody is sobbing in the audience, except my mother. I keep looking at her, and I keep thinking, oh my God, she's going to break down. Because there's a very sad moment in the movie where a woman kills herself. She commits suicide taking too much opium. And that is exactly what happened to my mother's mother. And the little girl in the movie, that was my mother. And so I thought, oh, she's going to see this, and she's just going to become hysterical, because it was the most traumatic thing in her life. She's watching, I'm looking over at her, and she never cries. And so at the end I said, well, you seem okay. Did you like? She's, oh, very good, very good movie. And I said, but you didn't find it sad? And she said, oh no, in China, in my life, things so much worse. This already much better.
That's wonderful. It's just, now, is it true that she suggested you write The Kitchen God's Wife?
She did. You know, everybody's always concerned. They say, with the Joy Luck Club, did your mother get angry? And what about other people in your family? And I said, oh no, I had people coming out of the woodwork trying to claim they were actually in the book, and they really weren't. My mother thought, she knew exactly what was fiction, and she felt people didn't give me enough credit for my imagination. But she also saw how much I struggled writing a second book. I started 7 second books, and she would say to me, well, why didn't you just write my true story? And I tried to explain to her, Mom, you know, fiction isn't written that way. You know, you really have to find your own story. But one day I realized, well, maybe she was right. You know, this whole notion of why do you write? You write to discover things about yourself, to clarify questions and emotions, and to see what you believe in, and to understand how your own history and your family's history, well, for me, you know, that is what was important. I would then be able to take my mother's story, what she would say to me, and I would video this. I would listen absolutely to her stories, and then I would give it back to her in another form. So she was giving me a gift, and I was giving it back in another form. What better way to spend our time together? So I did that. She told me about her life, the same stories I never wanted to listen to when I was a kid, and I videotaped them. And it was fascinating. And I thought, how could I have not heard this before? Her stories of the war, I never knew she was in the war. I thought she had never seen any kind of action, so to speak, telling me what it was like to flee the bombs as they were falling. And then I started to write this story, and I fictionalized it because I thought if she's not comfortable, she can honestly say, no, it's fiction. But she started reading it, and she would get confused because she would say, but I never knew Helen in China. And I'd say, no, it's not that Helen. This is a made-up name and made-up person. Oh. And it continued, and she said, there's so many people, I cannot keep track of them. I don't know who they are. And it wasn't until later that I realized that that was when her Alzheimer's had already started. And she had a very difficult time following this story, even though it was her story. She ended up saying to me later, when I found out she hadn't finished the book, she said, oh, you know why I need to finish? I already know that story. And it was true, but I realized she couldn't understand the story at that point.
You and your mom actually did get to go to China together, and you met your half-sisters.
Yes.
How do you pack for a trip like that, figuratively speaking?
I know. My mother and I actually ended up taking numerous trips to China together over the years, but the first one, of course, was the main one. The first one was the promise I'd made when I thought my mother was going to die. And when, I thought she was going to die of a heart attack, and she was hospitalized, and I had said, if she lives, I promised myself that I would take her to China and get to know her. So I did this, and I was going to meet the sisters I was sort of half jealous of and half ignorant of. I was going to see where she grew up, meet her brother, who had become a communist leader in reaction to what had happened to their mother. All these things, the influences of her life. And in spite of all the preparation, it was nothing like what I imagined. I didn't recognize my sister at first, and I was talking to this strange woman thinking she was my uncle's assistant. It turned out it was my sister. So the big dramatic, meeting didn't happen the way I thought. But other things I didn't expect happened. To see how much of my family life was simply the customs of our family and how I fit in pretty naturally because I'd been raised by the same mother, but how American I was as well. That really surprised me, that I was much more American than I ever thought. My assumptions were so American. I had this very bizarre worry that I'd go to China, they'd mistake me for one of the locals and not let me out of China, which was so ridiculous. My mother looked at me, she said, you don't worry. They take one look at you, they see the way you walk, the way you talk, they know you don't belong. And it was true. I stood out like such a sore thumb that people followed me. Hundreds of people would follow me as though I was some kind of movie star. And I hadn't written anything at that point, so it was not anything to do with being recognized. It was that I was so strange looking. It was a Chinese woman with long hair. Most women had their hair cut or in braids. I had on colorful clothing and a dress during the middle of the day and some fake jewelry and makeup. I looked bizarre to them. I looked Chinese, but I didn't look Chinese. My husband was with me, and I thought they were following him, and I didn't find out until later when I said, you go on ahead, I want to watch this. This is what it looks, it feels like to look different in a country. And I walked behind, and I realized they weren't looking at him. They all came and they followed me. They started trying to talk to me. They would touch me to see what I would say and what I would do.
What interesting.
That was early days. Now you won't find that in China at all. I mean, China is so modern now, especially in Shanghai and Beijing. I look like, somebody who's, bought rags and gone to China. And I look very old-fashioned compared to a lot of the Chinese people there.
It was when you were in China filming the Joy Luck Club that you discovered the location for 100 Secret Senses.
Yes.
Tell us, that was sort of an interesting kind of experience, wasn't it?
We drove without any plan. We hired a car, and I was with a friend, a photographer, and the very handsome actor Russell Wong. Every young woman's dreamboat. And he was taking photos as well. And we got to this little village that was pristine. It was 200 people who lived in beautiful homes, whitewashed mud bricks, and, streams running through, and no electricity, no running water except what ran through in the hand pump in the main part of the town. And then these walls, these over the hills that were the walls to defend the city in the ancient times. We climbed over that and into this valley that looked as though I had landed in the heaths of England. And then we climbed over another one, and it was as though I was in a different world. It was dark and foreboding compared to this pastoral English setting just one valley away. It was dark and foreboding. It had caves in the cliffs and this abandoned house that looked 1,000 years old. And I had this sensation that something horrible, horrible, horrible had happened in this area. And I knew then I was going to use it as a location for a book in the future. And I did, for the 100 Secret Senses. The strange thing about that is I picked that location, and I wanted to set some people there, the Taiping Rebellion, a bunch of these Hakka people there. But my sister, who had lived in Guilin, an area, the metropolitan area close to there, said, no, Hakka people have never lived in that area of China. And I thought, oh, well, too bad. Would have been a nice historical thing to have that person there at some point. And then I found out later, I got a history book, and quite by accident opened it up to an exact page about this guy who started the Taiping Rebellion, who was Hakka, who believed he was the second son of God, and he lived in a place called Thistle Mountain, south of Guilin, in those mountains, which is where we were. And I thought, what serendipity. This is wonderful. And there were these horrible, bloody insurrections in areas back there. So this was the setting, this was the imagery that I used for the story.
You mentioned your mother's Alzheimer's just a moment ago, and in The Bonesetter's Daughter, your character has Alzheimer's.
Yes.
You told me just a moment ago that you had to rewrite the book. Do you mind explaining that?
Well, I knew that I wanted to write a book about memory and what it is that we need to remember, what we forget, qualities of memory, the imagery of memory. My mother had always said something to me, a saying, which is, your character is in your bones, this visceral feeling, and I had thought about broken bones and bones that you find in archaeology, and I wanted to do something with this aspect of memory. But as I kept writing it, I also knew that because my mother was still alive, our memories together were still being created. If I finished the book, that would be the end of that book and possibly the end of her life and my recording of her. So I delayed finishing that book for a very long time. My editor, my very, very dear friend, was ill at the same time with cancer. And my mother died in November, and 2 weeks later my editor died. And it was such one of these holy experiences. Of course there's grief, but I had been prepared for it for 4 years. It was one of these horribly sorrowful times, but holy at the same time. And I knew I had to rewrite the book because I had now a different perspective of loss and what that meant. And it became deeper. I think it happens to anybody who loses a loved one. You cannot anticipate what you're going to feel, that sucking vacuum, and what it means with everything else you see in life as you go about your day. It causes you for a while, a period of time, And it could be a month, it could be forever. It causes you to live more deeply and deliberately. And you are a changed person. And because I was a changed person, I had to change the book.
And you write children's books.
Yes.
Tell us about your children's books. These are wonderful. I love them.
Well, The Moon Lady was the first one, and it was a chance to create a book with pictures, the kind of pictures that I grew up loving, very detailed pictures. I'm not fond of those very simple pictures that they give to kids thinking that that's all kids can focus on. I had an imagination at a very young age where I like to look at little details and create my own stories. And my friend Gretchen Shields had the same preference. And so we created that book together. The second book was called Sagwa, which was the name of my cat, a feral cat, who was the most ornery cat, terrible cat, lived to be age 21. But when Sagwa was 17 and she was diagnosed with renal failure and cancer and irritable bowel, and she was supposed to die in a month, I was so sad. And one night I had a dream, and it was a dream about how she got her colors. Because when she was born white, she eventually changed, and she looked like this Siamese cat. Only I called her the Chinese Siamese cat. And so this dream was about how she would dip her tail into an ink pot and write the rules that were given for the day and change the rules. And I told Gretchen about that story. She said, oh, we should write that book, do that book together. That book, which was for the memory of my cat, who then lived for another 4 years so she could see her name in print. That book then went on to become a PBS series for kids, and it's still on. And I'm so delighted when I meet these 4-year-olds and I say, I'm Sagwa's mom, and they look at me as though I've just said I'm Britney Spears' mom, or something.
Do you watch the series from time to time?
I do. Well, I've seen all of them because I also worked on all of them. I didn't write the actual scripts. What I did was the overall sense of the series, creating the new characters, who they would be, like Fufu the bat. I had a cat named Fufu. The psychological ages and mentality of the thoughts of each of the little cats, what that would be about. I also knew I wanted a series in which we would have dramatic little fun stories that would also represent the kind of emotional dilemmas, the ethical dilemmas that young children go through and have no words for. So, for example, what if you try to do a good deed for your friend, but that ends up making your parents very angry and something terrible happens as a result? How do you feel about that? You feel, well, you were just trying to be a good friend, and how does that work when you're trying to be good yet you're considered bad? That's very subtly in each of the stories, some little moral dilemma. And it's very hard to not put a pat answer to the end of that. So we struggled an awful lot with how you could present one possible ending, but also, in the background, one of the cats will say, well, you're lucky that it happened this way this time, it could have happened, so that you would know. It's not only one pat answer, things don't always turn out this way. So it was a challenge, but I felt that was something I could do then that would be not simply entertainment. It would have a little educational value about China, but it would also perhaps mirror something that a child could identify with on some very subconscious level. So that was important to me.
We just got a couple of minutes here, and I've got to ask you, what's it like being the lead singer in the Rock Bottom Remainders? I mean, you got Dave Barry and Stephen King, and you can be frank with us. How musical, really, is Dave Barry?
Well, this is how musical we are, because we always do this for a very, very good charity. And that's so that people can't be too mad at us when they come to the performance and say we're really not that good. We're good enough that we have other musicians who are willing to risk their reputations and sing with us. So we have Roger McGuinn, who's been with us, the founder of the Byrds, incredible musician. he's been with us for about 3 years. We had Warren Zevon for a number of years. We had Al Cooper as our musical director. We played with Bruce Springsteen. We played with Steve Martin. We've had great people. Judy Collins sang with us. Great, great people. And here is the difference. If you don't have an incredible voice, some beautiful voice, you have to have attitude. And that's true for all of us in life.
It is.
That if you have attitude, you have a lot. And so that's what we do. We sing songs with attitude. I'm actually backup singer on most songs. I have lead on about 3 songs. And my 2 signature songs.
Yeah, these are big. These are
Yes,
big.
these are big. I do a very sad story in which I have to act out something terrible that's happened, and that is Leader of the Pack.
Oh,
in
yeah,
which,
yeah.
you know.
I met him at the candy store.
Yeah, I met him at the bookstore, actually.
Oh, okay. Oh,
And,
see, yeah, that needed to be
Yes,
revised.
revised it. And then my other one is Boots, in which I am forced, for charity, to wear a dominatrix outfit and thigh-high boots. And then I have to use a cat o' nine tails and whip the voice at the end of the song. And suddenly I become a great singer that way.
And it's very admirable. Like you've really
Thank
made
you.
an enormous contribution.
Thank you.
Thank you, Amy, for being here. Thank all of you for joining us on Writing Out Loud.
Jackie Cooper Volvo supports numerous community projects and is proud to be a sponsor of Writing Out Loud.